What if you got an email from a complete stranger from halfway across the world? An email that somehow reaches back in time, finds a name from your family's past, a name you barely knew, and brings it right back into your life. Well, that's exactly what happened here. Let's get into this incredible story.
So this is literally the message that kicked the whole thing off. An email from the Netherlands to a family in the US. The guy who sent it, a man named Erwin, he'd been on a mission, a real quest, you could say. And finding them, that was the last piece of a puzzle that started more than 80 years ago, in the middle of World War II.
So who is this guy, Erwin? Well, he's a 54-year-old from a town called Born in the Netherlands. Around 2016, his interest in WWI history just exploded into this huge passion. He started collecting things, artifacts, and get this. In one case, he actually tracked down the family of a B-17 pilot just so he could return the man's original 1943 bomber jacket. So for him, this isn't just a hobby. It's about reconnecting the past.
And that passion for history, it eventually led him to one name in particular, Samuel Hanan. For Samuel's family, that name was just a faint whisper, the young uncle who went off to war and just never came back. So let's find out, who was the young man at the very center of this mystery?
When you look at the official records, they're always so blunt, just facts on a page. Name, Samuel Hanan. Rank, warrant officer. Date of death, April 27th, 1943. It's all just cold, hard data. But we all know that behind every single line like this, there's a real person, a real story, just waiting to be told. I mean, just look at this timeline. Samuel's life was tragically short. He was an American kid from LA who went all the way up to Canada to join the Royal Canadian Air Force, even before America was officially in the war. And then, his bomber gets shot down over Germany, and he's killed, just 2 days before what would have been his 21st birthday. Just devastating.
Okay, so you're probably wondering, how on earth does Erwin, all these years later in the Netherlands, end up focused on this one American airman? Well, the answer is rooted in this really powerful and honestly beautiful Dutch tradition.
It's this thing called war grave adoption, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Ever since the war ended, people in the Netherlands have been formally adopting the graves of Allied soldiers buried there. It's a real commitment. They visit, they bring flowers, they act as a personal guardian, all to make sure that these soldiers are never, ever forgotten. And get this tradition is so popular that at the main American cemetery, every single one of the thousands of graves is adopted. There's actually a huge waiting list just to get one. So for Erwin, that meant he had to look elsewhere. He started searching the smaller, local cemeteries, which is much more rare, but it was his only real shot at becoming a guardian.
And this, right here, is where the story gets kind of spooky, in a good way. It really feels like fate stepped in. His search led him to a little local churchyard, and the timing of it all, well, it's just mind-blowing.
So picture this. It's April 28th. Erwin goes to this cemetery, and he finds a small area with Commonwealth graves. And right away, one just jumps out at him. It has a big Star of David on it, marking the grave of an American airman. He just couldn't believe it.
Okay, let's just pause and break down how insane this timing is. He finds the grave on April 28th. That's one day after the 81st anniversary of Samuel's death. But then, as he's looking up the name, he realizes the very next day, April 29th, would have been Samuel's birthday. The connection he felt in that moment was just immediate. I mean, what are the chances?
So what does Erwin do? He goes back the next day on April 29th, and he puts flowers on the grave for Samuel's birthday. Just think about that for a second. It was probably the first time in 80 years that someone had stood right there, at that spot, to personally wish him a happy birthday. So naturally, Erwin immediately applies to formally adopt the grave. But he hits a little snag. Turns out, a local school had already adopted the plot for a group project. But Erwin wasn't going to be stopped that easily. He tracked down the head of the school, explained his mission, and they granted him permission to co-adopt. Now he has an official certificate naming him Samuel's guardian. But for Erwin, becoming the guardian was really just the beginning. His next mission, his real mission, was to find Samuel's family, to cross that ocean and that 80-year gap to tell them their boy was not alone and definitely not forgotten.
And he took this promise so seriously. He visited the grave 5 or 6 times in just the first couple of months. He laid flowers for the Dutch Remembrance Day and for the American Memorial Day. And all that time, he was doing what he called a heavy search to find the last missing piece of the puzzle, Samuel's living relatives.
And after all that digging, he did it. He found her, Samuel's niece. And as you can imagine, she was just floored. All her family had ever known was that simple, sad fact. He was killed in the war. That's it. They had no idea where he was buried, or that for all these years his grave was even being cared for.
And this really gets to the heart of it all. Because of what Irwin did, Samuel Hannan wasn't just a sad story or a name on a casualty list anymore. He was brought back. He became, as his family says, an active part of their history again, a real person to be proud of. This entire incredible story, bridging 80 years and thousands of miles, it all happened because one person decided that a name carved on a stone deserved to be a story again. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other stories like Samuel's are out there in quiet cemeteries, just waiting for someone to come along and bring them back to life?